Welcome to this video showing Tricentis Tosca and Microsoft's Visual Studio Team Services integrations. Let's have a look at one example of how Tricentis Tosca is being integrated in our customers' environments. Business analysts create and maintain epics and user stories in Visual Studio's Team Services. These are automatically synchronized into Tosca, where we can prioritize and design test cases based on the business logic and Tosca's built-in algorithms. Visual Studio Team Services is used as the build tool to queue a build which executes end-to-end test cases through Tosca on your available machines. The developer and QA team can then raise bugs from Tosca, taking all the log files and screenshots and creating a bug in Visual Studio Team Services, which is automatically linked to the original user story. Here we see the flow going through an iteration or sprint, and an example of the users and their roles. Now let's see how this works. Okay, so here we're looking at so this is the environment I'm going to use today. I have a virtual machine set up over here with Tosca installed, Visual Studio Team Services, and I'm using TaskTop as my integration tool to pull all the work items in from Visual Studio into Tosca. For the build server integration, this comes out of the box with Tosca itself, so there's no need to install anything additional there. And what I'd like to do is, before we go through this flow, just have a quick look at our two integration points. So I'll start off by looking at TaskTop. So you can see I'm using TaskTop and it's installed locally. And this allows Tosca to integrate with all the different tools out there that you can see displayed on my screen. So here's Tosca over here, and here's Microsoft Team Foundation Server. But it works exactly the same way for Visual Studio Team Services, which is what I have here today. And if I scroll up to the top, click on this integrations, you can see exactly which integrations I've set up. Bugs, epics, and user stories. But you can see we can actually do all work items, and this is already running. So I'll give you a quick overview of how it works. And if I go to the bug over here, what you'll see is at the top level, it says repository, and that relates to this one over here. So what you need to do is first choose a repository. And in this case, I just need to point it to my Visual Studio Team Services instance that I've set up myself. And enter in the credentials, the personal access token as well that I've used over there, and it allows us to connect to that repository. With Tosca as well, I've got that set up. It's a multi-user repository. I need my username and password, and it connects to there. And TaskTop will actually go off and find all the information based on the test cases, the defects, the requirements, user stories from the different repositories that we've chosen. So it's actually quite good that when you start adding different fields, so let's say, for example, some fields exist in Visual Studio and they don't exist in Tosca, I can add them in Tosca, and then TaskTop will actually pick that up for me. And how it works is we have a model that sits in the middle, and you can see that it says defect model. So in this case, I'm integrating Visual Studio bugs with Tosca defects. The model sits in the middle and actually just connects the two fields. So they can be named something different in Visual Studio to what they are in defects in Tosca. And that doesn't matter as long as they just map to the same model and to the same fields, we can share information across. So this is a great overview. If I just click on field flow over here, you'll see there's 22 mapped fields. And if you scroll down here, you'll see some examples. So a nice one here is this model over here has description, which it's using as the mapping point. In Tosca, it's called failure details, and in Visual Studio, it's called repro details. But it's the same information going to and from. Same with the title. You can see it's different naming conventions there. Same with the format ID as well. Doesn't really matter as long as we map them to each other. It's the same as well. And these are the ones we're going to see later in the demo when we actually create some defects. So that's how it works on a very high level. And we set up all the integrations in the same way from that. So if I jump back here, you'll see again, we've done epics, user stories, and bugs. And what you can also see is the direction of the synchronization. So bugs are both ways because we're raising them from Tosca to Visual Studio, but we still want to track the information. One Visual Studio progresses the bug from to active to resolved. We want to track that in here in Tosca so we can rerun them. So it's a two-way integration. Whereas the epics and user stories, we only want to use Visual Studio as our single source of truth. Whether we do all the creation and maintenance is done there, Tosca just gets an up-to-date copy and allows us to use our features on those epics and user stories. So let's now minimize that. Go over here and we'll have a quick look at the Tosca CI client. This is what we're going to use. That Visual Studio will actually point to this CI client. If I open that up over here, and it'll actually point to that exe, and then we've passed in some information as to which execution list it will run from Tosca. So that's already, you can see here, program files, Tricentis Tosca, automatically installed when you install Tosca, and we can run it directly from there. So in my case, I've got an agent, use a Visual Studio agent that identifies this machine, and then it calls the client and runs the test. What we can also do is we can set up a remote service on another machine. So we'll call the client first, and then it'll send off a call to another machine. If you decide you want to call it, you want to call the client from here, but the Tosca machine is sitting somewhere else, we can also have that service set up over there, and they're all very lightweight, so it's quite easy to set up. So if I collapse that, and last bit here is what you'll see is we also have this Visual Studio agent that runs, and it actually basically, if I bring that up here, it listens for jobs. So it says listens for jobs. That's what I've installed from Visual Studio, and that allows Visual Studio to identify this as a machine where it wants to run jobs. So you can see I've had it open for a while. There's a number of different errors here. Some failed, some were successful, and this is what now you can see it's agent reconnected because I started up my machine this morning. It reconnected automatically, and now it's already waiting for jobs to come through from Visual Studio. So that's what we'll have a look at. But for now, let's quickly go through and create some epics and user stories and start the process. Here's Tricentis Tosca. I'm not going to focus too much on this today. I am going to focus on the integration points. We have a lot of good videos that actually show all the functionality of Tosca. This video is mainly aimed at showing you Visual Studio and how we fit in with their software chain. So let's open up. First, we'll open up Tosca so you can see. Here's our requirement section. Here's a sprint, which will relate to an iteration in Visual Studio, and I've already got an epic and a user story that was created before, and this is for automobile from that side. So what I'm going to do is create them in Visual Studio, and when I do update over here in Tosca, they'll automatically pull in the new epics and user stories from Visual Studio. So just so you can see the before I create anything. Now let's go to Visual Studio. I've got everything set up here. Here's my project, Tosca. You can see over there. That's the dashboard I'm pointing to. I have some bills before. There's a few work items created, an epic, a user story, and a defect. That's what we just looked at. But let's now jump to work items, and we'll go to the backlogs. That's got quite a cool view. And once that's created, you can see there's the board. We have an epic, user story, and a defect linked to it. That linking always also gets done automatically in Tosca. And here's the epic from that side as well. And I'll stick to the board view so it's the same for both sides. And what I'm going to do now, let's open that up first, is create a new epic. And to help me with that, I've got all the text here so I don't make typing mistakes, and it speeds it up. And I'm just going to dump that in there and say this is the text I want for description. Copy that, paste that up there, and I can already create my epic, and that's automatically create. I can assign it to do everything else that I want, but just so that you can see before I create the user stories, jump back here, the synchronization happens in the background. I should be able to click update depending on how fast it is, and it should already pull that through, and that was pretty fast. So you can see straight away it's running in the background. We can define how quickly we want it to run. Because it's a demo, I've told it to run every 5 seconds, grabs the change, pushes it through to Tosca. That's for creation and maintenance. The second thing now I'll do is create a couple of user stories. And the reason I'm going to create 2 is just so that we can see the weighting that we do in Tosca. It makes it a bit more relevant when we have 2. So what we're going to do is create the 2 user stories. I'm going to link them to the epic. That relationship gets maintained as well in Tosca. And I'll close all that down. Let's link it now to the epic. Do a search for the actual work item. Don't have many there, but I know I called it automobile, so I can start off typing that. There's my automobile. Oh, actually, I just created one for truck process. So we started off with automobile, now I'm using truck. And let's do that again. Make sure I get that right. Do a search, truck, do a find, And there we go. So that's the new one I just created. Automobile was the old one. It's going to add it as the parent. Automatically, we can hit save and close. And then we've got one. Let's do one more very quick. Again, grab the text from here, paste it in there, and these are just the fields that I've mapped. That's why I'm entering data in them. You can map as many or as little fields as you want from that side. So last thing we're going to do here, link that to the parent again. Let's go back to truck. This time when I do the search, I should see two because I've got some user stories called truck as well. No, I didn't name it truck. Let's just add that. Okay, and we'll do the save and close and make sure we've got everything up. Let's do a refresh share in Visual Studio. And we will see our two new user stories. Let's click on one of them. And it should be linked to our epic. And it is over there. 2 minutes ago it was created and it's linked into that. So now let's jump into Tosca and we should get all the different user stories I just created and they should be linked to the epic, which they are. So great. So what I can do now is we created and we maintain them from within Visual Studio. All the information has been pulled across and this allows us to do our risk-based testing. And this is where we sit with the business users and we go through the frequency and the damage. We have other ways of doing this as well. This is the most common way we found our customers found this works very well. We can weight our epics and it starts giving us a risk-based view over there, but we can also weight our user stories as well. And we jump back to that. So I'm just weighting them so that when we link test cases to them, we actually see the risk-based coverage. And I'm making up these numbers at the moment, but you'll see it's automatically calculating the weight. Let's change that one so it's actually different. And then you can see each one's contribution to the parent and to the overall project as well. So now these ones already have test cases linked. So it's given us that dashboard view. Once we start creating tests and link them to these requirements and user stories, we will then get the same sort of reporting. So that's our risk-based section in Tosca. Normally we would go through the test case design, create the data combinations that we want to meet that requirement. That's the required tests over here. Create the model-based automation, and then we have our test cases created, linked to that. In today's demo, I'm going to skip that and just focus on the integration. So what I'm going to do is jump to the end result, which is our execution list. And this is where once our test cases are created, our data-driven tests, we drag them and drop them in here, and these get run in execution lists. And this is where if you want something like your build tool, like Visual Studio Team Services to come in, we hook it up to Tosca. So we tell Tosca either in this configuration parameter that it's a continuous integration execution list, or we can actually pass it in as a file when we set it up in Visual Studio. And then every time it runs, we have a new folder with the build and the results from the side. So this is the integration point it's linking to. I'm going to do a check-in all over here just to make sure all my requirements are checked in because I made some changes there. And now we can jump back over here. Let's collapse all this. Don't need that anymore, but I'll just minimize it. And now we're going to say, let's say I'm the developer. The tester's doing all their data-driven testing, the test case design, the automation. The developer does their coding and unit testing. And I'll jump over here just quickly so you can see our Visual Studio. This could be used for all of that. In my example, I'm not going to do any coding today, but just so you can see, we also have an API scanner which allows the developers or API experts to use to do all their API testing. And it's quite a comprehensive tool. We can do SOAP, SOAP and REST and all the different message types and authentication. You can see over there. That's all covered, but it's just another great tool that allows developers or API experts to do some API tests, and all that can be imported and reused in Tosca. We're very big on reusing work so that nothing goes to waste right from when the developer starts. So I'm launching Visual Studio over here just to show you that the developer is the one that's actually can trigger the build. This is the obviously publicly hosted URL. I've logged in, but anyone can access it. So I'm just going to kick it off from Visual Studio so you can see that the developer is the one in this role. And if I come over here and just go edit so you can have a quick look and see how we set this up. This was the Tosca CI client that I'm pointing to. So first of all, we're going to tell it what agent to run on. I've defined that agent, which I showed you, the little agent running on that machine. That's how it knows where to go look. Once it knows where to go look, then it points to the client on that machine. and then we can pass in some information like what's the result. In this case, it's JUnit, and some information over there. So some parameters there, whether we're doing a local or a distributed one. We have distributed execution in Tosca, so that can take over as well. All those parameters are set up there. And then once it's done, Visual Studio can publish the results in JUnit format. So all that's set up over here. From this point of view, I should be able to just come now and say, I want to do my run, and I'll just open this up so you can see generally you would most likely be using a Visual Studio virtual machine or hosted machine. There's the options there. What I've done is just gone for my local one there that I've set up. So I'm going to stick to default, and I can actually queue that now. Build 99 has been queued. I'm going to close this down. I don't need it anymore. Just to show you the developer triggered it. They can monitor it as well, but just so I'm not jumping around, I'm actually going to use my virtual machine here to do the monitoring. So when we can see it finished, this should be in progress now. That's great. It's running. We can come over here. If we're quick enough, we can actually see, there we go. It's running the job as well. So we can monitor it from there. We know it's working. It's kicked it off, but we can monitor it from within Visual Studio here. And now the job is running. And this is where we get all the information. So it goes through the initialize job, the get sources, and then this is the Tosca client part. So you can see there's the parameters we passed in earlier that I had a look at, the JUnit and the client we're pointing to, and it pulls all that information and should start running the job now from this side. And just as a refresher, these are the runs, the execution it's going to run. We do end-to-end automation in Tosca. So I've thrown in some examples of just a few technologies, UI, API, SAP WinGUI, running some database queries, doing some file compares at the end. But any of your end-to-end automation that you want in your smoke tests, it could be a single test, it could be a chain of tests, depending on how you set it up, we can cover all of those. And what we should see now is if this runs over here, it's done that part, it's running the Tosca client at this point. It does take a few seconds to get going, but in a few seconds what we should see is Internet Explorer pop up, run the UI tests, run the API tests. I've got also my API URL endpoint over here up and running. You can see I've ran some before, but we should see a new batch over here because we have 3 API tests, and I can see it's doing its job because the machine is now, CPU is now maxed out, so it is going. There's a lot I've installed on this one machine, like TaskTop and everything else. Normally they're done on servers, but for the demo it's easier just to stick with one machine. But it does take a bit of the resources, but we should see all that kick off now. So I'll collapse that. That's just going to send some calls. We can always come look at that later. I'll collapse all this and go to my desktop. And any second now, we should see the UI open up and execute those test cases for us. Okay, so that's launched already. Took a few seconds, but now it's going through the UI tests, the API, and now it should go fairly quick. Now, and then we can have a look and see the results. And what I've done is I've set it up to fail in one of the areas in the UI test so that we can also see the process of raising a defect from within Tosca and pushing that back to Visual Studio and all with all the result files and everything that goes with it. So just SAP, it doesn't just goes through a screen of 2 just to reduce the time, but it's more just so that you can see your smoke tests can be any technology. So when the developer does their commit or their check-in, you can trigger off tests and not just based on that application that they're testing. They can kick off smoke tests in other areas. Tosca covers end-to-end all technologies from an automation perspective. So we can run through every smoke test and see if we haven't broken something indirectly somewhere else. So the last few should be running now. That looks like it's almost done. I'll jump back to Visual Studio so we can see the end of it. This should update in a few seconds, and there we go. It's closing workspace and restoring license, so it's almost done. Then it's going to publish the results, do some cleanups, and we'll be able to see what it's done here. And with the error that I've put in there, obviously we can see that in Tosca, which we'll have a look at to raise the bug, but we can also see failures in Visual Studio as well. So as the developer kicking off the run, they don't need to go into Tosca. They will get some information in Visual Studio where they can maybe they can identify straight away what the issue might be and go fix it. If not, we can go into Tosca, have a look at the logs and raise a bug over there. So let's jump straight to the publish test results, and we'll go to the tests, and Visual Studio obviously pulls that JUnit XML that Tosca passes back to it. And you can see we have 7 test cases that ran, 5 passed, 2 failed. And what I've done is I've set up the UI test to fail. So if I click on the UI test here, scroll down, what you'll see is all the log files from Tosca. And there's the expected and the actual was different. So I just changed the expected so that we have a failure there. And what you'd also see is Tosca takes screenshots and we'd have the screenshot location there. So if you set that up, that's something we can do. We can set up screenshots to go to a shared location. If the developer wants to go have a look, they can do that as well. And this was just an example of a PDF verification being done. And again, a similar thing. I just changed the value. So the expected and the actual was different. I just changed that by 1. That's PDF compare that we did there. So, and the test that passed just basically show as passed from that side. So we have all the information there on that. So let's now jump back to Tosca and have a look and see the results here. This was the smoke test that was kicked off by Visual Studio. There should be another build and we should get the results now. Here, I cleared them before just so we can make it very obvious that there was an update that happened. So there's the exact same results that came back. I think there's my build new result over there. There's the 5 and the 7, the same ones we looked at, the PDF, the UI, and I'll open this one up here just so we can have a look and see the failure. Whether it passes or fails in Tosca, we get all the log files with all the data that we entered and verified along the way. And here's my verification failure, and a screenshot was taken at this point. So now let's say either the QA or the developer or anyone that has access to Tosca can actually come over here, do a checkout and raise a bug. One thing what we can do in Tosca is, let me just come over here and check out that folder to make sure I grab the right level, is if you wanted the defect automatically raised, that could become a part of the execution where we create an actual test case that goes in and does everything here like I'm doing now. We have a scriptless way to interact with Tosca. Click on this one. So the actual raising of defects could be done automatically as well. We could create a little script and that could run at the end as the last test. So I'm going to create a new defect here. And it was for trucks that we ran, this particular one, if you remember the beginning of the process. So I'm going to say truck. Let's just say bug for truck process, similar to like we have over here for automobile. And I'm going to close that down because I've got the window all set up over here. Same window we looked at before, but here it has a nice view because all the fields I'm interested in. I'm just going to grab some information. Again, this can all be automated if it's part of your test case, and it pulls back the information from the log files. And here's something I had to add is these columns didn't exist in Tosca, but I added them as custom fields, and I was able to map them to Visual Studio. So I actually want to tell Tosca, log this defect to the Tosca project and log it to the iteration pass 1 over there. So I do the check-in over here, and that should be the end of that. It should automatically go and raise that defect in Visual Studio. So I can jump to that, but I would like to stick with here for now just so you can see if I want to do an update or if all the information from Visual Studio gets pulled into Tosca as well. So it's a 2-directional synchronization we've set up here. So it's defect 61, status as new. I can jump to Visual Studio here, come back, oops, let's come over here, let's go back to my work items, and we want to go to the backlogs. And we should see my defect being raised. And there's my bug, it's automatically erased. Over here, if I click on that, you'll see all the information. There's the repro steps, just like we saw in Visual Studio before from the build side. From Tosca, all the information's in there. We'll even see screenshots being taken over here. Here's the screenshot. If I want to open that up, let's do an open. There we go. That's what happened at runtime. I was expecting 8,000 or 8 million, and the actual was 7,000. That's why it failed. And one thing I can also do, I didn't do it here, you can see it's unparented. If I minimize that, and that's because I forgot to do that, but I can always add it later, is this is, let's say I wanted to link that to an actual epic or user story. You can do an checkout over there. You can come over here and tell Tosca this execution belongs to this user story. And you can see that's brought all the results across. I can do a check-in all. And that relationship should now be maintained in Visual Studio because I've mapped that defect and that execution test to this user story over here, that should also now be pulled across into Visual Studio. So I've done a check in all there. What we should see here, let's see if we're fast enough. Jump to the activities. This is continuously processing. So once that login is complete, and it's going a little slow from Tosca's side at this point, it should push that back into the Tosca repository, have that link, and then Visual Studio Tosca will pick up that change and then allow that defect to be linked to the actual work item, the user story, sorry. Okay, and another thing we can do is as soon as any updates are done to the actual defect, so let's say I grab that defect here and I decide I want to move it to active or resolved and I move it across there. What we should also see now is if I jump back to TaskTop, it will then pick that up over here and you can see already there it's processing, it goes to pending. If I click on that one there and it's actually moving the bug from active to resolved over here, so it should change that over there, and then that should also be filtered back into Tosca. If I, oops, let's jump back to the issues section. I can do an update all, and now it's changed to resolved from that side. So hopefully that was useful to you, so you can see exactly how we integrate with different tools, Visual Studio being the focus of today's topic, for more work items and from the build server point of view. We do have a number of other integrations, so if there's anything else we haven't covered today and you're interested in, please get in contact with your sales representative. So thanks for your time today. Hope that was useful. Bye.